Shavua Tov, Gut Vach. As you may remember from last week, I mentioned that we just marked on Wednesday the beginning of the Rebbe's leadership, and I wanted tonight to share a story about the Rebbe. So it's two stories, kind of. There was once a young man from England who was in the Rebbe's room. And the Rebbe asked him, "Do you know what a Rebbe is?" He's kind of blown away, like, what do I know about a Rebbe? So he didn't say anything. And the Rebbe told him a story about the Baal Shem Tov. It's a famous story how the Baal Shem Tov, one night, he couldn't sleep. And he woke up his household and he said, "Does someone have money?" And his daughter said, yes, she put aside some money to go to the pharmacist in the morning to buy some medicine. And Baal Shem Tov says, "I can't sleep when there's money in the house that could be given to the poor people. Hashem will provide for us. We have to have trust in Hashem, bitachon." So he instructed his daughter to find a poor family to give the money to, and tomorrow Hashem will help. So the Rebbe turned to this young man and said, "A Rebbe is a person who gives everything away for others." That was just, you should know, by the way, that's what a Rebbe is. Having said that, this is a story about a widow in Eretz Yisrael, a woman with two small children whose husband had been an Air Force pilot, and he had been killed in, I believe, the Yom Kippur War. And the government in Israel looks out very much for the families of the survivors, and they were building her a special house, take care of her and her children. And the Lubavitcher happened to be involved in the designing and the construction of her house, and he began to encourage her to add a little more tradition to her life and to the education of her children. And he mentioned to her that next week he's going to New York to spend the holidays, the high holidays and Sukkot in New York with the Rebbe. And she asked if she can send a letter. And he said, "Sure, I'll be glad to hand the letter over personally, but you should know the Rebbe doesn't really respond a lot when it's around Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. It's a very serious time and very busy time, so you might not get an answer as quickly as usual." So she brought him over a letter. The day before he left, he traveled to New York and delivered the letter to the Rebbe's office. And he had a memorable month of Tishrei. He returned to Israel. His wife says, "This lady that you've been working with her house hasn't stopped asking if you're back, when are you back, and you must call her." So he calls her and she says, "You must come immediately. I received a letter from the Rebbe." So he shows up at her house and she pulls out the letter from the Rebbe. And the letter was dated between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which means that the Rebbe responded within 2 or 3 days of receiving her letter. The Rebbe responded. And the Rebbe spoke to her, responded to her questions about changing the religious level of the house and perhaps switching schools for the children to be more in line with the new levels of practice and observance. And she was worried about it, and new friends and new teachers and a new environment. And the Rebbe encouraged her very much. She had enclosed in her letter a picture that her husband had taken when he was flying over the Sinai desert. And there's a particular spot that's reputed to be Mount Sinai, because we don't really know. It's not that critical to us. What took place is more important to us. But there's a certain mountain where people think that is Mount Sinai. And he had an amazing picture taken from his fighter jet. And she had sent a copy to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe thanked her for the gift and appreciated how precious this was to her. And after answering all her concerns, the Rebbe said, "In reference to the question which you didn't ask, you should know that it would be a great merit and a great joy for your husband's soul if you were to remarry and find joy for yourself and find the beautiful structure for your children to be growing up in a house with a mom and a dad. It would not, God forbid, hurt him in any way or be disrespectful. This would be a great honor and a joy for him to know how happy you would be." And she said, she's like saying to this Lubavitcher guy that this is what she really wanted to write to the Rebbe, but she felt it would be like breaking faith with her husband to even write the question, "Should I remarry?" And she couldn't bring herself to put the question in writing. But that's what she really had in mind while she wanted to send the letter. The other things in the letter were really secondary. And here the Rebbe answer her on a question she hadn't even asked. And she was blown away, and she actually did listen to the advice and go on, etc., etc. But to know and to care and to feel for a person you've never even met, and to answer them with brilliance and wisdom and sensitivity and a divine spirit, that's a little bit of what a Rebbe is as well. May we try to connect ourselves by learning the teachings of the Rebbe and fulfill his mission to bring Mashiach. Have a great week.